Okay, welcome to lesson 7 in taking a finished drawing to a completed color rendering. In this lesson, we're going to make the legs of this robot. So I like this lesson because it's going to again reinforce a principle that I really like to follow in my paintings, and it's that um, less is more. For the most part, this isn't going to be too difficult because the shape that I'm going to make for these legs is going to be in shadow and basically black for the most part. The only part of it that's going to get any attention at all is going to be this claw out here in the front. And again, the reasoning is because it's right in our focal point. Have a high level of contrast too. So I'm going to flip that off. And with my geometric lasso tool, I'm going to begin carving a shape. Now my line art is pretty loose. What I was most concerned with when I was doing my line art was the big shapes, the overall shapes. So when I establish those and I go in and I make those compromises that I was talking about with the geometric lasso tool in efforts of getting a hard edge shape, I'm really not losing too much of the essence of my original design. There's going to be something really, I mean, in my opinion, something really beautiful about these shapes being black for the most part. And I wouldn't really call it getting away with it, but rather just pulling it off nicely. Bold shapes and good design is really cool and should look good even when it's a solid color. And I tried to make these legs as appealing as I could, and they're pretty dynamic in shape. They have a lot of contrast and thickness. Thin sections, thick sections, you know, where the thin leg runs into this joint here. And they ought to look cool when they're filled in as a silhouette. Getting to this claw now, which is actually my favorite part of this whole robot, actually. And it should also look really cool because the lighting setup is going to be pretty dramatic. You know, out of the blackness, we're going to see all the surface detail of that claw. And it's going to make for a really cool contrast. At least in my head so far it does. So I use my line art as basically my tracing paper. With that lasso tool, I'll flip it off now. And I'm going to select that very darkest shadow color from the head of the robot. And let me see if I have a layer dedicated to these legs. I do. So I will just fill in. Boom. Pretty cool. The most I might add to these legs as far as rendering goes is a little bit of bounce light from below. And that'll only be on the legs that are closest to that focal point light, because I think they're going to be the ones that are going to receive the most light. Anything else is going to probably be best left in shadow. I really like that. So again, just like I have with basically everything else, I'm going to take that bristle brush and I'm going to soften edges that I think need a little bit of softening. So not only just for the sake of softening, but also to make them seem a little more natural. Try to again get that charm of traditional painting in this digital painting. And I know it must sound like I'm beating a dead horse when I keep talking about this less is more principle, but it really is so crucial in making artwork that really appeals to the general masses. There are a lot of really amazing paintings that just have 1,000 things in them, or one object that just has so much detail in it. But you can make something just as impressive that doesn't have all that surface detail, that doesn't have all the noodling and the rendering, but is rather just a shape. And I think people really appreciate that. Again, I talked about bombarding the viewer's eyes with too much stuff. And that is what I'm trying to avoid at all costs. So I won't really soften anything here in that general focal point area. I'm going to leave that alone. Just a little bit here on the tip, but I want that to be hard-edged. Except for the curve in this claw, I want that to be a definite curve, because that's kind of the design. Just slightly like that. Let me flip on that line art one more time and make sure that we're good as far as the shape goes. Yeah, I think we're still pretty accurate. That's great. So, knowing that we're working in just silhouette right now, I'm going to give these legs another layer of detail. I'm going to use some of those wires and maybe some of that ribbed tubing again. Number one, because I think it helps the believability of the piece. Really makes it seem like somebody, worked on this thing. So it was actually designed by an engineer. It relates different elements to each other. It connects them, makes things cohesive. And lastly, it's actually a lot of fun to do. So again, I'm making that ribbed tubing brush. And I probably should have saved it, which is entirely possible, but I just got ahead of myself and forgot. And I'll show you how to do that as soon as I'm done making it here. Remember, all I did to do this was I took the radius of the brush, I squashed it, I turned it onto its side, I turned off any pen pressure related shape control here, turn that off, and I set the angle control to direction because we want that tubing to follow the direction in which we're painting. Now, to save this, you see this little icon up here in the brushes panel. This is a drop-down menu. Let me pull this panel out here. This is a drop-down menu here, and you want to select New Brush Preset. And you can call it Ribbed Tubing. Stick it back up there where it's out of our way. And here we go. So I think I want one of those between these two elements. So that tubing is kind of out in the open, which probably makes this robot's legs very vulnerable, but most villains don't seem to be too smart about those things in most movies and films, so I'm cool with that. I feel like often points to the weakest part of a creature or robot in films and cartoons is always right on their chest or back of the heel. It's a button on their head. It's kind of funny how exposed villains can be sometimes. I'll put one more here. Fantastic. So I like it, and I'll merge it. And now I have this very cool shape with some details around the the silhouette. Save that. Now, for the coolest part of this, of these legs, that is going to be the its part of the claw. Now I made a new layer and I parented it, and again I'm going to take that bristly brush. I'm going to sample one of these colors off these panels here, and I'm going to put in my general light shape. When I say light shape, I mean area of the claw that's actually being affected by the light. Everything else is kind of in shadow. Well, not kind of, it is in shadow. I'll bring the brightness down to there. And using the hue saturation, I'll make less of a green, more of a gray. Flip the line on, the line art on, so I can see what I'm doing. See some ridges here in the claw, that's cool, so I'll try to maintain or retain those. Alright, let's get to it. So I'm going to find some shapes in this claw and begin to define them each with my 3 values. A mid-tone, which we've already established for the overall shape, and then a shadow, and then a highlight. New layer, parent it for the highlight. And the highlights in this claw I'm going to make a little bit brighter than everything else in the robot because again, it is being struck directly by that focal light source. So we want it to pop. Grab a section of this base color here and bring the brightness down, making a little gap there. It's pretty cool. Making another shape on the end of the claw, and we're going to define its shadow. Okay, and now I'm going to sample those highlights and bring them up even a step further. And I'm going to take a standard Photoshop brush, put in the specular highlights. Basically, these really say that the shape is being hit with some extreme light. Very good. Make a new layer, parent it. I want the bottom half of this blade to vary in color. I want it to change, or be different rather than the pieces above it. So I'll select them. Take my bristle brush. Paint in a new value. And it's a little bright, so we'll pull it down. Yeah, to about there. Or there. Yeah, right about there. Now, gonna put on transparency lock. Try to give this the illusion of a reflective metal. Really make it look kind of like a knife. Put in these streaks of light reflection. Something like that. Maybe a streak of black, I don't know, we'll see. See how this looks. Yeah. Very cool. And one other technique to really push that sort of metallic quality. I'm gonna take the soft Photoshop brush again. Number 19, pull the hardness all the way down. And I'm going to turn on noise. This adds a little bit of speckled, sort of speckle to the brush. I'm going to take white, and I still have a transparency lock on this shape. This is all one layer. And right where the edge of this surface material meets this surface material, I'm going to put some of these highlights here with this soft brush. Nothing too extreme. That's good. I think it'd be cool if we cut out a notch from this blade here. Yeah. And maybe just a couple more ridges on the top parts of this blade that might be catching light. Very good. I'll merge that all down. So now we have all the legs on one layer. I just selected a small patch here. I think I'm just going to vary up the surface of this claw here a little bit. I'll select many patches, go darker, go lighter, change hue, maybe both. Let's add a little more detail and interest. Make a new layer and parent it. This will be for the purpose of making some rivets in the design. Now, remember I mentioned that bounce light from the bottom of the legs. I'm going to go ahead and incorporate that because I think it's going to help sell the shape and the legs a little bit more as actual forms and not just a shape. In my opinion, they're working right now. I think it's fine. But, you know, we can add a little more interest to these legs, and I think it's worth it. Sample this green color from that face. And again, the same technique. I've made a new parented layer within that shape, and I am just creating shapes and then erasing them out the way I like. You can see now how this bounce light from the bottom kind of defines a different plane. You know, a plane or a surface that's angled differently than the rest of the shape. This is good. Okay, just pick out something interesting here as far as the shape goes. Running up this leg. Maybe do a couple here. Pull the brush across it and see what I get. A little too bright, but it's fine. We'll take our eraser and put it at about 40% opacity, or erasing power in this case. Do something like that. And I like it. Do the same thing with this claw. And then go back and erase it to our liking. Okay, and I think that looks good. We've got a really cool shape. It's simple, it's black, it's going to read really well against our lighter color background, which is not too different from this solid gray that we have right now working behind. And the piece of this leg that's in the focal point is well detailed. It's got a good contrast between the shadows and its lightest color, and I think we're in a good place with these legs. So next, we're going to address our hero soldier, who's underneath this claw, and then the ground plane on which he's standing.